So I'm Helen Gill. I am the founding director of a company called Engage Comms. We are a comms consultancy, but it isn't the fun side of marketing. We specialise in niche sectors like debt, which is probably as unglamorous as you can possibly get for somebody who works in my kind of industry. We first started working in the debt sector back in 2013 when we were commissioned by the Credit Services Association to carry out what ended up being an incredibly detailed piece of research to online consumer and stakeholder perceptions of the CSA, its members, the industry. I think what the CSA expected us to come back with was, oh, there's a bit of negative stuff on Google, isn't there? Here's how you can get rid of it. And what we actually came back with was a real concern about the business model. Because what we found when we started mining the very, very fun consumer forums that abounded in those days and have now kind of died out a little bit, what we found was a huge disconnect in language, in wider stakeholders were concerned about versus what firms were doing online to allay those concerns, which at the time was nothing. So this was your basic kind of in a nutshell interaction that happened. Joe Blogs receives a letter from Lowell Group. They've never heard of Lowell Group and they don't feel a customer of Lowell Group. Back in 2013, believe it or not, social media was quite new, but we did have the internet and people were very savvy with that. So they would immediately Google the company name, not knowing who they were. And these consumer forums were incredibly search engine results because every single thread within a consumer action group or a money saving expert forum had the company name in, and every single comment on that thread was counted as a landing page. Now the Google algorithm has changed quite a lot since then, but what then happened was firms' websites, and believe it or not, CSA member firms at the time didn't have a website at all. And the ones who did had stock images of 1980s women in headsets, very cheesy straplines, and then pictures of them at the credit awards with a bottle of champagne, with lots of messaging telling clients how great they were do in terms of consumer trust and customer wariness. It massively exacerbated it. And coming to the sector completely fresh as a communications professional, my immediate reaction was, hang on a minute, collections isn't actually financial services. Its primary role is communication. The new digital age was ignoring the online world and trying to communicate with people who were being told by others online to ignore them. So there was this vicious circle that didn't work from a commercial perspective and didn't work from an ethical perspective. Now this is pre-FCA authorisation, so the industry was preparing for much kind of stricter regulation, and obviously a big change was coming, and thankfully the CSA and the industry were very, very open to this criticism. Criticism and enlightenment that the research brought. And when we repeated a kind of summary version of the research in 2019, we found a huge transformation, both in terms of the way consumers and stakeholders were behaving online, and the way other content online had developed, but also the way the industry was engaging with consumers and engaging with customers and using online and other channels. And what we saw had happened, and the key thing that had created this step change, was a move from being a very inward-looking industry to being an industry that recognised the need for transparency in the digital age and recognised the need to actually look outside of the industry to see how it was viewed, and do that in a very, very kind of open-minded way. And actually, the collections industry doesn't get anywhere near enough credit for what it's done in terms of that. And in terms of that. And there will always be inevitable reputational issues and customer wariness in this sector. But what the sector has done to transform itself is way above and beyond anything that's happened across the financial services market in any other niche sector of financial services. What now concerns me is that fast forward 2 years on from that 2019 research, we've since had an unprecedented global pandemic, we've had Brexit, we're now in the throes of a massive cost of living crisis, and what I am seeing is a huge change in the way people view how and whether they have to pay back debts, and also how they view the firms within the industry. And what I'm seeing is a huge increase in this us and them mentality that's playing out back 10 years or more, and undo a lot of the hard work that's been done if we don't look to address the strategy and build this into the digital journeys that firms in the sector are going on. Earlier this year, CSA published on digital communications, and it raised some really important questions, challenges, barriers, but it only very, very briefly touched on customer wariness. So me being me, got on my soapbox and wrote a blog about this, and the CSA being the CSA very open-mindedly said, blog about this, and the CSA being the CSA very open-mindedly said, okay, we take that, thank you for saying this needs a deeper dive, let's run a session at the conference on it. Great sign of how the industry's moved from being very inward-looking and defensive towards a much more transparent, open-minded. What we're here to talk about today is, yes, digital communications is a really, really important part of the future of the collections industry. It's a really, really important part of how firms engage with customers. There are now some amazing, as these guys are going to be able to talk about, tools, data, kind of digital platforms that actually make the engagement with the customer incredibly enhanced. However, I would warn that investment in these platforms is only going to bring reward if it is tied in and integrated with the basics of communications 101 essentially. So what's happening out in the marketplace, listening, gaining the insight, understanding the customer at this time when we have things like a huge campaign called Don't Pay UK, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen, that's getting a lot of backing from people saying, they're going to protest against cancelled direct debits on their energy response about what that's going to mean for your creditworthiness and the impact on you, but it does go to show quite low levels of financial literacy when it comes to things like that. I also recently came across a change.org petition, which I will share a link to afterwards, which is directly calling on people to profiting from people's misery during the cost of living crisis. Now, it's this misplaced anger towards the collections sector that I think should be of the biggest concern to firms at the moment, and could mean that actually digital communication and digital tools for convenience could actually cause more customer wariness and build more distrust. And when I talk about the basics of communications, I can give you examples from the original research we did in 2013. And we looked very, very carefully at the language that was being used by customers. We'll now most likely see on things like Trustpilot. And what we were seeing was a language that reflected how emotive debt is. So fear, distrust, immediate not wanting to talk about these issues and problems, shame, immediate not wanting to talk about these issues and problems, shame, anger, all of these kind of emotions that come with the word debt and come with personal finances. And what we actually found was that at all parts of the spectrum, from the kind of I'm going to give you unverified advice that these guys are cowboys and you shouldn't contact them, through to the much more measured and balanced things that you see now on things like the Money Nerd blog. If you haven't seen moneynerd.com, take a look, because it will be coming up in the Google search rankings for your company name, because Money Nerd must be very, very, very good at SEO, because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of landing pages on that website that ask questions that are ask and then answer questions that are being asked on Google. So, for example, is Lantern a legitimate company? Do I have to pay Perch Group cowboys? They're using these questions to get to the top of Google search results for company names and answer the questions. Now, unlike back in 2013, when the unverified advice on the forums was, no, ignore them, fill in, when the unverified advice on the forums was, no, ignore them, fill in this letter, bury your head, I'll give you really good legal advice, and even though I'm not even going to tell you what my name is, the response to those questions is very measured, but it's a really clear sign that actually there are people out there, willing to answer questions that are being asked and are listening to what's being asked. So the very fact that this blogger has been able to identify these questions and these company names and then post content that answers those questions goes to show how searched they are. And ultimately, what everybody who searches for these things online is looking for is one thing, and that is reassurance. Now, the cynical consumer of today doesn't need reassurance that virtual elections firms are soft and cuddly and the greatest people in the world, and they actually just want to have a cup of tea with you. They don't want any money from you. What they want is, and how you build trust on a basic level, is transparency and honesty. And that's what people are looking for on a very, very basic level. So you may want to invest in, on a very, very basic level, so you may want to invest in digital tools, digital channels. You may want to gather lots of data to get customer insight. You may want to start using WhatsApp to contact your customers. You may want to create self-service payment tools on your websites. But have you got your brand strategy? Are you positioned as a legitimate, responsible, highly regulated company that is there to create a dialogue with the customer? And we're going to go on to talk about a few things around that come down to things like first impressions and that kind of thing. But that the collection sector can have a one-size-fits-all marketing brand strategy that might work for lenders, that might work for MasterCard or Barclaycard, who, you know, sponsor Glastonbury and make that emotional connection with customers, because customers don't feel like they're your customer, and you aren't high street brands, and you're tailored to the interaction that you're trying to have with these customers. But it also has to be set in the context of where we are now, and in this context of the media narrative around the cost of living crisis, coming off the back of a pandemic where people got used to furlough, business grants, lots of government support, but also younger generations coming up, and new types of credit like buy now, pay later, which have changed the culture of how people view lending, credit, debt. All of these things need to be taken into account to be monitoring the agenda and looking at what's happening out in the wider marketplace as an absolute board level priority, because firms in this space need to be really, really, really capable of very fast and rapid change as things are happening, based on things that were happening in the news this morning and new pieces of research that I was seeing, and even the things that were presented during the morning plenary sessions. And one of the things I would say is that the morning plenary sessions actually brought a lot of optimism, and I don't want to add to the doom and gloom of what we're seeing in the media at the moment, because, and I think that if firms can get this right, overcoming customer wariness as a board level priority, and it's part of your FCA consumer duty, it's part of your other strategies, but it's not a tick box regulatory exercise, it's about the DNA of your business. and understanding what the DNA of your business and understanding what that means right down from your company logo to how you respond to a Trustpilot review. And these things are not nice to haves. They're not kind of flashy creative things. This is like real kind of part of your business model stuff. Creative things. This is like real kind of part of your business model stuff. So we're going to go on to talk a bit more about the current situation, the new demographic of people that are getting into debt who may have never engaged with collections firms before, and the new conversations that are going to have to be had with those people as part of this cost of living crisis. But first, I would like to hand over to the two great panelists we've got today and ask them to introduce themselves and just briefly tell us about their kind of perspective on this. And then I'm going to kick off the questions and then hand over to you guys to a meaningful discussion that gives us some good outcomes and practical things to take away, as well as a bit of food for thought in terms of the current challenging climate. So Mark, do you want to...
Great, thanks Helen. Yeah, appreciate that. Hi everybody, Mark Opperman. I'm one of the co-founders at Webio. So we're a tech company, but we help our customers engage with the consumers that are in debt. And really, I think you've touched on it, and I've wrote down 3 words here: engagement, emotive, and shame. And that just picking up on that when you're engaging with, people, and we see this every time, that yes, you can send people an SMS, yes, you can send people WhatsApp, and you can have web chat and all that, and we do all that, and that's great. But actually, that's just the technology. It's actually how you use that, the language that you use, and it's incredibly powerful. And we see this every time, that if you go back, and you mentioned you were saying going back 10 years, still today we engage with customers, and it's very much the language used sometimes is very do this, you need to do that. And actually, flip that on its head. Get into a conversation with somebody, actually have a conversation, understand that they actually may not be feeling the best at the moment about their current situation, and by the right language being used, you're going to make the technology work a lot better for you. So, perspective of, technology is what we do. We help our customers increase engagement, collect more, and all those type of good things, but actually you need to do it in the right way. And so it's not just about the technology. For us, it's very much about using it cleverly, and we see this all the time, from the language used, the way that a conversation, you're lowering their sort of barriers for, gosh, is it okay to have that conversation? And rather than sort of hitting them with a mallet, you're getting into a conversation, and that is really what we're all about.
Great, thank you. Simon?
Yeah, thanks Helen. Afternoon again everybody, so my name is Simon Gregory, I'm the Sales Director for Afternoon again everybody, so my name is Simon Gregory, I'm the Sales Director for Data on Demand. So my background before Data on Demand was with TransUnion, so 7 years there, most recently heading up their alternative finance sector in the UK. So my expertise, what I'm kind of bringing to this is 7 years there, most recently heading up their alternative finance sector in the UK. So my expertise, what I'm kind of bringing to this is certainly from a kind of data side. For those who don't know Data on Demand, we're first of all the people who are around your necks for most of you. But we're an alternative provider of helping companies to better engage and ultimately, hopefully, provide better outcomes for the customers. We do a lot of work in financial services, and specifically, again, aligned to today's conversations, we work a lot in collections and recoveries. So there's a number of and in collections and recoveries, primarily what we're doing is helping provide more information on the customers that you guys are serving. So again, straightforward things like contact channel information, making sure you've got the right methods to contact customers, providing insights on things like employment state, income, expenditure, and also the other side to that is what is very topical in a number of these sessions around consumer duty, is helping to identify vulnerability. So it's a big topic at the moment, and obviously a lot of people are you would assume in the debt situation they are naturally in a vulnerable situation, but it's adding extra insight there to help businesses kind of align with the regulatory requirements. And just thinking about today's session alongside the kind of data angle to it and working with a number of CSA member companies, I was also thinking about it from the perspective of our business and try and reach out and engage with people who we think we can have a meaningful conversation with. And if you think about it from our side, we're trying to think about the right time to contact people, the right message to go out to people with, the right wording to use. So again, hopefully I can bring a bit of that context into the conversation as well.
Great.
The conversation as well.
Great, thank you for that. So I mentioned before about this kind of misplaced negative narrative towards the collections industry that is currently bubbling up at the moment and is something that poses both quite a big threat but also an opportunity to the sector. And I wanted to kind of ask you both as a starting point, if there was one thing that firms could look at immediately in response to the cost of living crisis that would transform their kind of customer interaction, wary of the narrative that is currently out there around people's kind of feelings towards the industry, what one intervention or what one thing would you say would be a kind of board level priority at the moment in terms of understanding what's currently happening? In terms of understanding what's currently happening. Do you want to start?
Yeah. But picking one thing, given what I've just said, I'm probably going to have to go with data. So I think that we've had a lot of conversations today about board level conversations, whether it's consumer duty or whether it's for companies to understand the wealth of information that they already have. So it's not just about going out there and trying to purchase endless amounts of new data that will help you engage with people, but it's also looking at the insights you may already have about those consumers that you're trying to engage with. If you may have dealt with consumers before, you may be dealing with them already for different portfolios. So it's things like being able to formulate a single customer view of individuals when you're bringing on new portfolios to work on, and within that, are you able to capture things like, okay, yes, I've dealt with this. Capture things like, okay, yes, I've dealt with this person before, or I'm already dealing with them. I know that their preferred communication channel is email, or actually, I know we've dealt with these people before. They prefer a phone conversation. So those are the types of insights that can definitely help. Create that engagement with the consumer, and all of that is based on proportionality, certainly, because I know you can go overkill and you can spend lots of money on new data, etc. But just trying to understand how it can help you engage, I think is a good starting point before you start to put any strategies into play.
Just to challenge you on that slightly, in this very rapidly changing environment and the current news agenda, how up to the minute can that data be? Are you able to actually identify and see trends in kind of things changing over time?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we'll probably come onto as part of the discussions here, and for firms like Webio, for example, and lots of other businesses out there, there's immediate data available through AI and through kind of conversational technology, etc. But there's definitely a lot of data out there as well, which is real time or close to real time. Mm-hmm. So certainly a lot of the contact channel information that we provide out to businesses is at most kind of 24 hours old most of the time. Yeah. And different data sources will be more outdated than others. But there's definitely kind of real-time data there that's available to be used.
One of the examples of that would be on Webio propensity. So what we've been doing for the past 2 years around our AI, is that can we use live data, and how can we use it to help both the end consumer and our client? And what we've done is looking at the conversation as it's happening, looking at actually what's being said, and then looking at the outcome. So you're tracking what people have said over a long period of time, over hundreds of thousands of conversations, understanding the outcome, and then obviously running that through a propensity engine, where now within 3 utterances of a conversation being started, we're identifying with about 85. So immediately you're identifying, and again, this is a digital conversation, so it's easier to identify, say, a vulnerability from a phone conversation. It's a lot more difficult in a digital format. So that ability to identify, to flag it to the agent should the agent be involved, or an extra level of care. So that is something that we're seeing being used more and more. So that's just one example. So as you said, at a board level, that type of what are we doing to first off engage with people, the methodology, but also when we engage, are we using the right language? But also when we engage, are we using the right language? And are we identifying the customers that we need to give extra help to, because actually they're the ones that ultimately you'll need to make a difference on.
Yeah, I think that's really an important point in terms of the potential risk to firms of embracing digital technologies, in losing the human touch and the human angle. And I see this a lot in the work I do in the debt advice sector around, yes, there are lots of digital tools that we can use to improve and enhance and empower debt advisors, but actually that human element is so important. And I think there is a challenge there around how human can data ever really be, and how do we kind of take data and AI and properly, obviously, as we talked about, debt is incredibly emotive, and we can't reduce it down to kind of numbers and figures, but also we live in currently very uncertain, challenging times, which is creating this very emotional response through things like the change.org petition that we. How can we ensure that we don't lose the human element of customer engagement when we embrace digital technologies? Well,
that's a great question. Don't lose it. That's what I would say. But actually, this is where it's not a one hat fits all. Okay, so you can't go, oh, every conversation we're going to now put through the chatbot, and it's impersonal and all. It doesn't have to be. So actually, first off, most times when people engage, you're going to have to do an ID and V. So you're going to have to verify it's the right person. That's super easy to automate. So immediately you've got a saving there. Then typically there's going to be FAQs. People are going to have lots of queries, questions. What's my balance? When's my next payment due? All of those things you can automate in real time. Take conversation, give the customer the information they want very quickly. What you're doing at that stage, though, is that you're freeing up probably 50-60% of the agents that normally would be there doing those jobs. So actually, you're giving the agents more time to be able to actually they're able to help them, rather than agents on a phone maybe worrying about average handling time. Gosh, I can't speak too long. I know, so that would be where use the technology to actually take away lots of things that just have to be done before you get into some of even the clever stuff. So there's lots of ways that it can help.
I think also to add to that, it's about providing those options. So we talked about the preferences before. How does people want to be engaged with? Do they want to speak on the phone? Do they want to be going through digital channels? And I think if we look at a lot of the new players, who are coming into the market, they are all focusing on that digital journey, and there's good reason behind that, and it's good to have that option there. But the options is the important thing from a consumer perspective, and the changing way that consumers want to engage. Is also something to consider, because if we think about some of the things that have happened recently, I know we're kind of moved on to cost of living now, but the pandemic is still not very very far behind us. And during that time, I think what a lot of businesses in how people want to engage. So previously you would have looked at demographic, younger generation, they want to do everything digitally, and if you get into the older generation, they want to pick up the phone and actually speak to somebody. But during the lockdown and things like that, when it wasn't as easy to have those direct conversations, I did the same thing with my parents, helping them to use chatbots and getting them to use different online channels to engage with businesses. So I think it's having those options there and being aware of the fact that necessarily just because somebody did something before, it may not be the same for them now.
I think that's an interesting point. That actually links to one of these questions about digital acceleration during the pandemic. And when I talk about culture change, that's the exact kind of thing that I mean. It's completely unprecedented, but when you boil it down to its basics, it's the same as what's happening now. During the pandemic, people felt powerless during this cost of living crisis. And when your audiences that you're trying to engage with feel powerless, what they need is to feel empowered, and choice is a big way of enabling people to feel empowered. And so in terms of what more the sector can do to improve public perception about all the work that's been done to kind of transform this just talking to clients and talking recovery rates and big call centres, the business model's transformed, but what can we do in the next decade? I think choice is going to be really, really, really key to that, and understanding the customer on a whole new level, that says, actually, we're going to put the power into your hands so that you have a range of options to be empowered to deal with this. Because actually another good thing to come out of the pandemic was a shown increase in financial capability, and financial education, and that's only going to come out of the cost of living crisis as well, as people become more aware of their energy usage and their food shop and their, how am I going to make ends meet at the end of the month? And so there are opportunities out of this threat, putting the power in their hands, but also trust is a two-way street, and if firms want to be trusted, they need to trust their customers. Customers need to feel like they're being trusted with dealing with the situation. And that kind of brings us on to another point that we were going to talk about, which is going to be really important for this next decade in terms of the new demographic of people who've never been in financial difficulty before, who now might be getting a call from a collections firm that they've never heard of. And it's almost a kind of wipe the slate clean, start again, back to where we were in 2013 job. And my concern is that there's a danger if we don't really think about and address that new demographic of going back to square one, and people going, because of the culture and what happened during the pandemic and how people currently feel about their rights and the need to actually pay, there's a real the need to actually pay. There's a real danger of this huge influx again of advice online about ignore. If you don't talk to them, they can't get a penny out of you. You don't have to. This cost of living crisis is not your fault. And it's these guys. They're trying to get money out of you. So I think there's and it's these guys. They're trying to get money out of you. So I think there's a big element of first impressions, and we talked about this in the preparation for the session about. Is actually the purpose of making the first interaction with the customer about payment? No, it's not anymore, and the customer is about understanding their circumstances. So when I talk about the dangers of accelerating your digital journey too much, what I mean is things like when I go onto firms' websites now, and there's a great big button that says, pay now. And they think it's great because they're like, oh, we're making it really easy for people to pay. They don't have to speak to us. They can just click a button, self-serve. And when sometimes this idea of choice is interpreted as that, put the power in their hands, let them pay. But actually, does that then position you as the expert? Does that position you as the expert in identifying vulnerability? Does it position you as the expert in understanding their circumstances? Does it build trust? And in a world where we're seeing less and less and less trust in institutions and firms, how many people are going to click that button and pay when they've never heard of your firm and they don't feel like they're a customer of yours? So talked about in the lead up to the session in terms of what is the first interaction with any customer before you know their circumstances, and what's the first interaction with these new customers that are coming into the marketplace, and I'm interested to hear both of your views on that.
Yeah, I think you're right in what you said, and probably most of it, there will be a lot of people who are in debt for the first time, who are engaging with collections recoveries businesses for the first time, and they may not be aware of, you know, fairly big brand names in the collections and recovery sectors, the likes of, you know, your Lowell's, Cabot's of the world, who may be very recognisable to people who've been in persistent debt and been in that situation for a while. So it is important to recognise that. We certainly see it in all of our data, the number of new people coming to, you know, different types of kind of high cost credit options because they're running out of other options. But I think the communication bit then is, as you said, it's not about trying to set up a payment in that first interaction necessarily. And I know quite a few of the clients that we deal with now are looking at taking the approach of saying, actually, all we're trying to do with our first correspondence is open up a communication channel. So it's saying, listen, we've taken on this, reassure you that you're a regulated business, that we're doing the right thing, we're trying to help you. Examples that we talked about in the build-up was saying, listen, we're not going to come back to you for another month. That's it. We're just letting you know that we do want to engage with you, and maybe giving options like asking people what is their preferred, method of contact, and giving them a reason to engage, which isn't necessarily set up a payment plan.
Yeah.
Just on that,
yes,
it is funny that it's the language that you use. Give a very quick example. It's the language that you use. Give a very quick example of that, sort of real world example. A utility, and it was a case of where that it went from the utility to the first DCA, went to the second DCA, came back into the utility business, and they called it the utility business, and they called it their dead file, and it was a case of where they couldn't turn them off because it was water, or would be incredibly difficult. And they went out and just say, they're not looking for payment, we know you're in difficult, how can we help, type of message. They had 9% done all the things, and the best of the DCAs tried to engage with that person, but by simply changing the language, understanding the situation that they were in, they nearly got 10% response rate on that. Blown away. They wouldn't get that on most other files, never mind one that was that compassionate and putting the right sort of content into a message. You will get people to engage, and as you say, Simon, sometimes it's not all about just collecting from the start.
Thank you. We've got 5 minutes left, and I just wanted to go kind of in a slightly different direction now with two of these questions that are on the screen. When we did our original research back in 2013, a lot came up on these forums, and there was a lot of stuff around tracing and mistracing. And it's interesting to see these questions come up about verifying is the correct customer, checking emails, numbers, checking things are active before they get passed on. And I've seen a lot of work go on over the last 10 years around how do we kind of look at this full customer journey from the creditor through to the collections firm, then debt advice and whatever. That point that you just said, you know, as the customer, you've then dealt with 3-4 different sets of people, and that's 3-4 different brands all talking to you about the same thing. And how are you meant to make an emotional connection with them when, you know, and so what do you think can be done to kind of address information? Can it be automated, that verification process? Does that work? Is there a way that it's kind of really quick and easy to get to the point of understanding, yes, I'm speaking to the right person about the right thing, and I know what their journey so far has been? Or is the data sharing across the cycle still quite disjointed?
Well, verification is relatively easy. I saw a question earlier, there's many John Smiths. Yes, there is, but it's the other points of what's your date of birth, what's the account number, what's the postcode. So that's, to be frank, that's quite easy, and that's very easy to automate. So, but the data sharing isn't something that would happen. But using the data that the company has, definitely from the point of view of putting this engagement in context of maybe the multiple engagements that they've had, certainly use the data that they have well. I always find that are they compulsive hoarders? They keep data, lots of it, but actually, are you using much of it? They're not. Mm-hmm. So that would be something that they should be using more of the data in relation to the context of each conversation.
And just to finish then.
In relation to the context of each conversation.
And just to finish then on this really important point, because I've had conversations about this today, and it's actually something we talked about at the very beginning of our conversation about this session, when I raised the point when we kind of first came to the sector, and I was like, oh, this is weird. You get a company who you're not the original customer of, and sometimes they don't even tell you who they're talking. It's not, we're contacting you about your EE bill. Now, I know that's changed now, but back in 2013, that wasn't the case. It was, we've got an outstanding balance of yours, you better get in touch and contact us about it. And somebody's asked, is the future for collections BPO or as a DCA? Would education be more acceptable if it comes from a lender letterhead? And I think that feeds into what we've just been talking about this customer journey and actually understanding where the customers come from before they even reach you. And I think actually a lot of the work around that needs to even reach you. And I think actually a lot of the work around that needs to come from the creditors themselves, because I know it's been a huge frustration of the collection sector that that journey doesn't come to them in a particularly smooth way always. But what are your thoughts on that in terms of, I know you talked about the original creditor was, but from a brand perspective, from my point of view, looking at it from sort of brand communications, it's even down to kind of, if the client is Klarna and they've spoken to the customer in a certain way, should you actually be mirroring the language of Klarna as well, or EE, and how different is in terms of tailoring the interaction according to the originator creditor, and the relationship between the collections and creditor?
Well, definitely that clarity, making sure that, and again, obviously that happens today, of who is the original. But I always say that the same type of engagement should happen. Because it's a case of where they've got into this situation because of a certain set of circumstances. You may need to actually respond to them rather than, when they were buying something, they probably had every intention to repay. You've mentioned Klarna there, they probably had every intention to repay. You've mentioned Klarna there, or a buy now, pay later. They probably had every intention, but it's a case of where it may not be appropriate and the language may need to change. I don't know, Simon, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think last bit then I think is just the lenders, let's get it right, the underwrite in the first place. So there's a certain amount of, there's probably not many in the room so I can say it, I don't really care. We've got to that point, we've got to align with the regulation we have in terms of how we engage with that consumer and what information we pass on. But I think back to that brand awareness and reassuring the consumer, yes, it would be very helpful if you could continue on the same kind of conversations, almost the narrative that's already been set, make it very clear why you're engaging, who you're engaging, again on behalf of if it's not a purchase, and just making it plainly clear that you know the customer's story, you know where they've got to, and help them to join the dots and feel like they can reach out to you and be comfortable with you.
Yeah, I know the time's up now. I think we could talk on this topic all day, and there's 5 or 6 other things we wanted to cover that we haven't had a chance to. But I hope we've managed to answer some of yours. So I'm Helen Gill. I am the founding director of a company called Engage Comms. We are a comms consultancy, but it isn't the fun side of marketing. We specialise in niche sectors like debt, which is probably as unglamorous as you can possibly get for somebody who works in my kind of industry. We first started working in the debt sector back in 2013 when we were commissioned by the Credit Services Association to carry out what ended up being an incredibly detailed piece of research into online